all of you to the ARIN's regional dialogues on bridging the climate finance gap in Africa, with a specific focus on Southern Africa. As the Southern African regional focal point, I'm very honored to moderate this important convening and also to help open a dialogue that is both policy relevant and grounded in lived realities. As an anthropologist, I also see climate finance not merely as a technical or financial concern, but it is also a social and political process that shapes everyday life. So in Southern Africa, climate change is experienced through deepening inequalities, uneven vulnerability, contested access to resources, and persistent marginalization of communities whose knowledge and labor sustain adaptation on ground. Climate finance, therefore, raises critical questions about power, about voice, about belonging. Some of the critical questions who defines priorities, who controls resources, and who is rendered visible or invisible in the national, regional, and international climate agendas. So today's convening centers on stakeholder partnerships as key enablers of effective climate and nationally determined contributions NDC's finance. It invites us to think relationally across communities, states, markets, and regional economic communities about how finance can be mobilized, governed, and utilized in ways that are equitable, accountable, and impactful. I encourage all of us to engage in this dialogue as a shared space for reflection, learning, and strategic imagination. At this juncture, it is my honor to invite the Executive Director of ARIN, Dr. Johannes Atela, to introduce the regional dialogue and outline the objectives of convening one. Over to you, Dr. Atela.
Yeah, thank you, Temka, and thanks to everyone who has made time to be part of this dialogue. Apologies, my background might not be so academic or conversational. I'm attending another meeting in Mombasa, and it's quite full, so I have to get a corner somewhere to sit. It's on SDG synergies within the region. So just trying to look at that, and we've just concluded a panel that we convened on climate on SDG financing, and how even climate financing can be strengthened to have knock-on effects on the other SDGs as well. So thank you so much. As Temuka said, my name is Johannes Atela, the Executive Director of the Africa Research and Impact Network, which is a network bringing together over 200 researchers and policymakers from across 36 African countries with two specific mandates. One is to support the consolidation of evidence on what works and what does not work, and the transformations needed, whether on climate finance, technology, and innovation. And the two is to support peer learning and make visible some of the innovations that different stakeholders are doing for policy and investment. So for these dialogues, we are really very keen to reimagine the climate or NDC financing pathways for Africa. Indeed, the challenges that face NDC financing have been articulated in many articles, in many documents, and we know them in terms of think about capacity to develop bankable projects, institutional weaknesses, things to do with the lack of proper data, and of course other aspects that are quite contextual, culture and all that. So these have been well documented, but still, despite the fact that we know all these gaps and challenges, there's still a lot of uncertainties with regards to NDC financing. So in other words, we know the challenges, but the solutions are not here with us. We are not embracing solutions towards these challenges. So these dialogues are more of solution oriented in the context of appreciating, yes, we know we have a problem. We don't want to talk about problems more and more every day. The question is, how do we begin to build a transformative agenda for NDC financing in Africa, thinking or taking into account the context, the complexities that surrounds the global space, because climate financing is a global thing. We have issues of global politics. We have issues of development agendas, both at the country level, but at the global level. We have the private sector. So the ecosystem of climate financing is quite complex as well. And it is not one fit for all. So the big question is, how do we craft transformative solution within these complexities in ways that helps us to take advantage of the opportunities that exist with the private sector? We talk about public-private partnerships. What models are there, and what are the important aspects or facets of this? We are talking about the role of multilateral development banks in mainstreaming climate action in development financing. We are talking about public budgets, which are actually targeted at development. How can this be really aligned to respond to climate change as well in terms of mainstreaming? We are talking about innovative climate financing instruments that are emerging. What do we need to be able to make this work? You know, are they properly institutionalized? And if they need to be institutionalized, how would they look like? So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the critical questions that these dialogues that are regional are aiming to look at. We are doing these dialogues from across the 4 African regions with the understanding that there are contextual differences in terms of governance, in terms of policies, in terms of opportunities. You know, while Kenya is doing very well in renewable energy, you know, the Central Africa and part of West Africa are more, you know, are very well with forests and REDD+ programs. So they're contextual different with regards to climate actions, and of course vulnerabilities is quite clear. So we approach this conversation through the regional perspective. So yesterday we had the East African dialogue, which was very powerful, and today we are having the Southern Africa edition. We will also have the West Africa edition as well as the North Africa edition. And it is my hope that we are going to have an open conversation. This is basically aimed at, you know, thought-provoking our you know, perspectives and just moving out of the comfort zone to be able to really highlight what we need to do in order to achieve transformative financing within the complex changing climate financing and development landscape. So with those few remarks, I want to say thank you. Back to you, Temuka, and I look forward to listening and engaging with the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor, for those kind remarks and the warm welcome. At this point, I don't need to abuse my position as the moderator. I just want to quickly jump into inviting our speakers. So I would be introducing them one after the other. So I think we've got 5 speakers today who are going to talk us through what they prepared in relation to the questions that they were given. So let me start by calling out Dr. Tando Kuhlekwani, who is a postdoctoral fellow in development studies at Nelson Mandela University, and she holds a PhD in agricultural economics, specializing in climate change, climate smart agriculture, and community resilience. Her research focuses on climate-induced migration, coastal vulnerability, green finance, and the adoption of sustainable technologies by smallholder farmers in Southern Africa. She has published widely, presented at regional and international forums, and actively supports youth development and community empowerment through education and capacity building initiatives. Over to you, Dr. Kwani. Marinate us through your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you so much. I think the regional director has already given us a background of what we are going to share or what we are going to talk about today. And thank you so much for the moderator for your introduction. I hope I'm going to indeed marinate you with what I'm going to share. I hope you can all hear me. Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you from my side.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's fine. Then it means everyone can hear me. Thank you so much. The dialogue, thank you so much for the invitation. I am yes, an academic, but I always love being more practical than going into deeper terminologies and deeper terms, because I believe that we always have different audiences that will be around us that need to understand what we are talking about, especially on my side with my question, which is asking how can finance flows be localized and decentralized to empower the frontline communities. So I believe that today, possibly, we also have a community that we have with us that would want to understand and want to know what we are doing as academics, what we are doing as financial institutions, so that them as the frontline, as the receivers of the funds, how can we make sure that the funds, they get them, they use them the right way, and also maybe also for us to close the gap, because I've realized that the challenge that we have is that we apply for funding when we are sitting in our offices and we assume blah blah, we want to do this, then a fund for 1.5 million comes in, and then we realize that what we thought was is not. But then because the funds have to go, then we just say to the community, my project was coming here to build a dam, so I'm here to do one. And the rest, we don't mind. We don't ask much. We say someone else is going to look for funds for that. So we find that at the end of the day, the community is affected, and we are somehow not doing justice to the community. But at least with this dialogue now, it can also assist us and help us to understand the community perspective, how they need also to react to the climate issue that is coming up, or the need for climate action according to the SDGs. So to answer this question, I would say that this can be done, or the finance flows and localization and decentralization can be done by putting decision-making power and financial resources directly into the hands of those most affected, especially with the youth, the women, and the children. They are the ones which are most affected by this. Recently, when I was doing one of the studies on climate-induced migration, I realized that it's easier for men to actually leave women in climate-affected areas as they go to the urban areas to look for work. And then when they come back, they say that they now have money to take care of the family. But at times, the challenge that is there, especially with climate change, it's not about having the money, but it is about being protected from the disasters that happen. Imagine when a male figure leaves the home and then there are floods, and then they only come back to realize that their home has been destroyed by floods. So you find that children, women, and youth are the ones who become mostly afflicted, and these are the most that we should put also in the front line, as the frontline communities. And those affected, usually they've got challenges that they face, obviously, which is poverty, which is SDG 1. Some say that it's actually not an SDG, but it is an outcome of all the 17 SDGs. And also we have got the issue of climate change, and also the extensive systematic exclusion, where the community or people around the community can just be excluded just because of some reason, be it gender, be it age, be it sex, be it anything, that we feel that we need to exclude this type of group just because they cannot receive maybe a certain funding because we feel like they are able. So these are the challenges that the community will then face. But we are saying that we should not exclude anyone in this. Looking at what the United Nations in 2015, they came up with a term which was saying that we leave no man behind, or we are leaving no one behind, which means that there is every reason why we are also involved in the climate finance, we are involved in the climate action, we are involved in any aspect of in the community, because we want at the end of the day to be able to make sure that our communities are well taken care of, and they are well funded, and they achieve more. Just maybe to just give a brief introduction or a definition of what climate finance is. It is a short definition. We can call it the money that is dedicated to support climate action. And what climate action usually, it's a goal that is in global action, which is in the SDG 13. But us looking at the SDG 13, we also look at it. It is the primary focus. Yes, it might be the primary focus, but it is also can be used as a way of becoming the center or the key of all other SDGs. So once we solve 13, which is climate action, we know that we have solved climate SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy through the renewable energy. So climate finance can actually assist. Once we do climate finance, we are funding, we are looking for money that is focusing on climate action and mitigating and adapting to climate change. We know that at least we are also solving affordability and also clean energy. And we also looking at SDG 14, which is life below water, and also SDG 15, which is life on land. And if we check, there are always inhabitants or there are always communities that are involved in all these aspects. That's why I'm saying that we are leaving no one behind. To answer this question, we are trying to involve everyone in the community so that we make sure that there is no exclusion that happens, whether it's by age, whether it's by gender or by sex or any aspect. We make sure that no one is left behind by consulting or looking at the community. What are their needs? Going there instead of us sitting in our offices and creating our own funding proposal, actually involving the community and asking them what is it that they need. Because this is a gap that we have always not want to have a conversation. Others may say that maybe because of ethical clearance issues, but better go for ethical clearance issues the longer route, but get the money that you need to get so that you can be able to fund the community. It's always good to see communities being funded. Like, for example, yes, I know that I'm supposed to be talking about Southern Africa, but there is no way that we can talk about climate action or we can talk about climate finance and exclude Kenya. Kenya is doing very well. I remember one visit that I did in Kenya where I saw them using renewable energy. It was creating human waste and biogas and making tea instantly. So that is a small village, that is a small community which already is being involved in this. So instead of us producing biogas at a large scale, we can also do that at a small scale and make sure that the issue of energy poverty is addressed. And we can also see countries like Zambia, they are also doing very well. Where there is a climate smart agriculture, they're doing very well and they are funded by the Green Climate Fund, which is the GECF grants. And we are seeing that they received an amount of 137 million. And if you check with the climate smart agriculture, Zambia is also doing very, very well, especially that fact that they decentralized the funding and they made sure that they transferred the knowledge to the communities. With Lesotho also, their project where there is a Highlands Water project there, which is also happening. We see that the community also becomes involved in the whole thing because once it's a water project, it means that there is sufficient water in the community and also outside the community. They are also and there is also assistance that they gain. And also, well, not forgetting South Africa, which is also doing a very good job again. Though, yes, we know that there is room for improvement in every country, but that fact that each and every country, at least there is something which is coming up, it is very important for us to acknowledge what is happening. So we are saying climate finance flows are not only about scale. It's not about the amount of money that we have put into the community. It is not about the figures, but also it is about where the funds come from and also how the funds are moving in the market and also how the community then benefits. So instead of us just looking at funding the communities, we should go back again and check whether the communities were well funded, whether the people received the money, and whether the money was used efficiently and effectively at the end of the day. Because that's also the issue that we need then follow-up meetings that we check with the community whether they actually utilized the funds that they were given. Because we have seen that most of the time, this issue of us just giving funds and assuming that the funds were utilized well, especially in our African context. The issue of corruption is becoming a very big issue. So corruption, it does not have an exception because climate, it is a disaster fund, but any type of fund, anything can happen. So it means that we need to be able to trace and to check whether the communities are well taken care of. So most of the cases, it's an issue of us transferring the knowledge to the community, making sure that the communities are also involved in all aspects, making sure that the communities are involved also in our dialogues. Like, for example, in the G20, imagine bringing the community there, letting them sit and letting them ask the questions, be the policy makers, be the policy initiators, and then maybe the politicians, the government, and the researchers can then come in to finalize or to refine, maybe to academically write whatever that the community has come up with. So I think that's basically what I can say. So we are saying serious knowledge transfer is needed at the end of the day if we want to involve inclusion and exclusion criteria in climate finance to different communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwani, for such an impeccable talk. I think we have had enough to take away from what you have shared with us. And I think also it has also invoked a question on the issue of climate finance. How can it be shifted from centralized top-down systems to community-controlled processes that can give frontline populations a real decision making power, the resources and accountability over climate action that affect their everyday lives. Thank you very much for that. I would like to open for one or two questions if anybody wants to ask a question or two to Dr. Kwani. I open it to the floor. Anybody who would like to ask a question before I move on to the next speaker? Anybody? So if there's nobody who is willing to ask a question, or maybe they are still digesting what you have said, let me move on to our next speaker. Let me call upon Ms. Veronica Gundu, who is a Chartered Development Finance Analyst with over 16 years in environmental and climate diplomacy, climate finance and sustainability. She serves as the African Group Negotiator for Mitigation and currently works with youth and children in green skills and surface and climate mitigation and adaptation innovations and promoting climate justice and intergenerational equity. Ms. Veronica, let me give you the floor. Could you please focus through what you prepared for this talk?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tamuka, for the opportunity. And thank you, colleagues, for inviting me and for those that are listening in. As already said, my name is Veronica and I'm a climate finance expert. In terms of reforming climate finance architecture for equity, accountability and impact, maybe firstly, let me start by saying, what are the inequalities or the inequities that we face in the climate finance space? Firstly, you realize that 10% or less than 10% of global climate finance reaches Africa, and only about 2 to 3% is adaptation financing, which is very minimal. And understanding the vulnerabilities that countries face, and especially least developed countries, when it comes to accessing financing, the barriers that exist in accessing whether it's bilateral or multilateral climate finance is really out of reach, because they talk about fiduciary processes, they talk about environmental and social safeguards, they talk about gender mainstreaming. And we know that traditionally in most organizations, gender is still something that is novel. So these become embedded and systematic or systemic barriers that you begin to see in the climate finance discourse. The other component, of course, is the actual accreditation of accessing climate finance, which excludes local institutions and even those that are at early stage So for small growing enterprises accessing climate finance, when you look at the requirements, they are already exclusionary. And the fragmented financing that exists within the different countries tends to also undermine and weaken countries' potential to access climate financing. And I think also even the failure by our own ministries of finance to understand what is climate finance, because for others they actually view climate finance as an environmental issue which should be dealt by the Ministry of Environment. So you need to get that support from the ministries. So there's need for strengthening country ownership, build capacities of the necessary ministries, and also understand how the insufficient monitoring also obscures accountability in the climate finance system. So it's very difficult to then talk about accountability for climate finance if it's really channeled to where it is supposed to go. So in terms of the governance reforms that we need, I think firstly is the simplified access mechanism of climate finance, whether it's bilateral financing or multilateral financing. We need to ensure that we have mechanisms that support even small and growing enterprises and local communities to also access climate finance if it is going to be inclusive and also taking on board all the needs. There is also the need for greater representation of vulnerable groups and also even vulnerable countries in terms of the boards where these funds are being discussed. For example, clear representation of Africa in the Green Climate Fund Board and understanding and articulating the issues that affect these countries and how we can make these funds more socially inclusive, more gender responsive, but also speaking to resilience building of our communities. So I think the director, when he introduced ARIN and the objectives, he said that it's not a one size fits all. So to really understand what type of financing do we need at project preparation phase and what type of financing do we need at financial close and actual continued management of the projects or post-project implementation. So once we understand that, then it helps us to access the needed climate finance. And in terms of the governance reforms, one thing that you need to understand is that Africa is not coming from a level base when it comes to climate finance, or even in terms of global access to the financing system. It has been always traditionally exclusionary, and Africa has been left behind. When you talk of financing in Africa, Africa is viewed as a high-risk continent. But in terms of renewable energy, Africa has less than 1% default when it comes to energy financing within the climate space. But we are still viewed high risk. We are also still viewed with low potential to pay back. So these are challenges that already exist by being perceived to be there. And how do we reform those challenges? How do we reform the finance architecture system? Africa, we get our financing at 15 to 20%, but developed countries are getting it at 2%, 3%. So the margins are huge if we're going to support climate action, especially if you talk about transitional financing in the African continent, where most of our countries are still largely dependent on fossil fuels. So it also comes back to COP30 outcomes, where there was a call for phasing out of fossil fuels. And there was also a call of understanding the implications of unilateral trade measures in developing countries. What are the implications and what are the reforms that are needed to support some of these discussions? So there is need for independent oversight and harmonized transparency and reporting of climate finance by developed countries to even avoid double counting. But also in terms of our country responsibilities, it's important that we strengthen our national climate finance strategies and frameworks. We need to establish interministerial climate finance units that really understand the programmatic approach beyond workshops, but at a global level in terms of strategic positioning to access climate finance. And then secondly, we need to build institutional capacity for fiduciary, environmental, and social safeguards, as well as governance systems. Almost 34% to 50% of countries that are highly indebted, they are in Africa. So what does it mean even in terms of climate finance? We can't continue having climate finance flowing into Africa so that we increase our debt. We cannot leave our children a debt based on climate finance. That is injustice. So these are the issues we need to be talking about when we're talking about reforming the climate finance architecture. What does it mean? It means we should have less debt for Africa. Funds should fall in grant format and also in highly concessionalized financing so that we don't introduce a climate debt to least developed and African countries. We also need to empower our own local governments and civil society organizations to even hold some of these governments accountable in terms of how the climate finance is being used, because it will then help us in terms of reporting, also in terms of supporting co-financing to unlock the related climate finance that can support sustainable and inclusive development. And also when you talk of the reforms that are needed, we also need assurance that climate finance is not a prescriptive decision, and it should not be punitive, but it should also be in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication. So once we understand that, it then really helps us to align and also even help countries align their national planning with their NDCs and their national budget, so that even climate financing becomes additional and also supports even the marginalized and vulnerable groups and covers the inequities that are already embedded in the systems. So it is important to ensure that climate finance prioritizes highly vulnerable communities, including women, youth, and marginalized communities. And also we allocate those funds in a way that even the marginalized communities benefit from them, and also they are country-owned and they are community-based. In terms of, how many minutes do I have, Tamuka? As 1 minute. Okay. So maybe as I conclude, what are the systems for accountability and monitoring and reporting when it comes to this component? I think the aspect of climate budget tagging is very important, especially for our ministries of finance and also the national climate finance databases, so that we understand which are the sectors that are strategically positioned to unlock climate financing. And I know other countries have already taken leadership in the carbon markets. How should we ensure that they work both for the country and the communities where these projects are embedded, but also in terms of our sustainability reporting standards, as well as data management in terms of ensuring transparency within the private sector discourse becomes very important for co-financing and also for investment-aligned climate technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Veronica Guntu. I really appreciate your very rich and nourishing talk. I think at its best, it interrogated financial architecture itself, questioning who qualifies for funding, who manages it, whose risks are recognized and whose knowledge is valued as bankable. It is also challenged whether current climate finance, reproduces existing exclusions through the complex application processes, scale bias, and technocratic metrics, and so forth. Thank you very much for that. I would like to open to the floor to ask 1 or 2 questions. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question, please. Maybe I would like to read a comment from the chat box for you, Ms. Guntu. Somebody mentioned that most finance is taking form of debt. This is risky for developing nations. It should be more grants. Would you like to comment on that?
Let me comment on that. I think as part of the reforms as well, both in the climate processes, but also even in the political landscape, this is one of the issues that is coming up. I know when we introduced the reform of the financial architecture in the climate negotiations, parties said it was a wrong platform because the financing architecture is discussed in the World Bank and other global systems. But we felt that because some of these financing architectures are also being informed by climate change. So if you look at some of the unilateral measures like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, it is a result of climate change. So it is a unilateral measure. So also if we have climate financing that is punitive as a result of climate change, we need to bring it in the climate discussions. So it is very important to then guard against countries getting debt as a result of climate change, yet developed countries committed to provide that financing in the form of public financing in provision process and not as a mobilization strategy. So I do agree with the colleague that it is in the interest of Africa to ensure that we have more climate financing flowing in grant format. Although there is a narrative that grants can never allow you to invest and develop. But all the same, in terms of then allowing tailor-made financing is very important, because if it's investment and it has a return on investment, then it can flow in a way that is concessional. But if it is addressing the vulnerabilities of communities, it has to flow in public financing and in grant format. And also the private sector can participate as part of their corporate social responsibility and their environmental and social governance reporting system to really build the resilience of the communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Veronica. I think I would like to read another question. I think it's directed to you again. It's from Alois Musenche. He's asking, how do we put the last first in climate finance, understanding that local communities have already been generating some mechanisms of adaptation? Would you like to comment on that, Ms. Gundu?
I think what is important is to then understand what what mechanisms the communities have been generating. That's why the aspect of indigenous knowledge systems becomes very important when it comes to adaptation. And also when we talk of ownership, it's likely to then speak to some of these mechanisms. I think the mechanisms are largely in terms of the adaptation strategies, but in terms of ensuring that the communities get access to finance to implement the mechanisms that they have been generating is then an important piece. So you cannot talk to a community to say, can you show us 3 audited statements for the past 3 years? Can you show us your procurement guidelines? So how then do we ensure that the financing is flowing to the communities, not to burden them, but to implement the mechanisms that they have been generating over time to enhance their adaptation and resilience?
Thank you very much, Ms. Gundu. I think I would like to believe
maybe let me take the last one on blended
the
finance.
At this
Tamuka, I'll just take the last one on blended finance, then you can move to the next speaker. And
okay.
Are there examples of blended finance that you can share? Blended finance has really had a lot of mixed views on whether it's working or it's not. But one exciting thing is that there are a lot of successful blended finance case studies, and blended financing across both public, private, and philanthropic financing, largely in the renewable energy sector. So you find that the likes of UNDP are putting a lot of resources to conduct feasibility studies. And then once there is a track record, the private sector can then come in to invest. So that is a good blended financing mechanism that is working in the public, private, and philanthropic financing. For example, I know Zimbabwe has an SDG fund to support renewable energy, and it's a blend of the old mutual support, UNDP, and the government of Zimbabwe, which really demonstrates a blended financing structure. And also one thing I realized is that you can actually have public sector blended financing, whereby the government of Zimbabwe can come in with 15%, with maybe 2% fund loan, and then GCF can actually come with a grant. So this is public to public sector financing, but in a blended format. So GCF can then take the first loss and the high de-risking component within the public to public blended financing. And it's also working very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I think I would like to, in the interest of time, let me try to move quickly to our next speaker. Let me invite Dr. Jeremiah Mshosho. Dr. Jeremiah Mshosho is a climate change, environment, and renewable energy and health specialist with over 15 years of experience at the national, regional, and international levels. He leads the climate change, health, and environment team at WHO Afro, driving initiatives at the intersection of climate change, health, and environmental issues across 47 African countries. Previously, he held leadership roles at UNDP Zimbabwe, UNICEF Mongolia, and WWF Africa, focusing on climate change adaptation, renewable energy, and environmental health. Dr. Jeremiah Mshosho holds a PhD in climate and renewable energy finance, an MB in energy and sustainability, and a master's degree in development studies, and a bachelor's degree in environmental sciences. He is a certified expert in climate change and renewable energy finance from the Frankfurt School of Finance in Germany. At this point, please, Dr. Mshosho, the floor is yours. Talk us through what you prepared for this talk.
Hi, Tamuka, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Now we can hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Today is a holiday here, so I was not even interested in any meeting. I'm very tired, but thank you so much for the opportunity to share experiences with colleagues who are joining this meeting. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you from Brazzaville, Congo. Today I'm going to talk a bit about regional enablers of NDC financing, and particularly I will talk a lot in terms of the role of regional economic communities in terms of supporting NDC financing and implementation. So, as you know, climate change knows no borders, and as such, we need to think globally and act locally. And global climate policy is actually shaped at the global level, where we have those negotiations, where we come up with those frameworks. But in the end, we need to domesticate those policies, give a direction at different levels. Africa, as a region, we need to understand this policy. We need to break it down, understand it holistically, speak with one voice, make joint efforts to be able to actually then implement the guidelines from that global policy strategy or a framework. So while NDCs basically demonstrate national ambitions when it comes to climate action, they are shaped by regional and global trends and realities. So regional economic communities, for example, SADC and COMESA, are essential for accelerating NDC implementation because they create policy coherence, project pipeline aggregation, and scaling up investments, which is really the prerequisites for being able to mobilize climate finance, or the finance which is required to implement the NDCs. So First, what regional economic communities do is they harmonize regional policy frameworks, and then they align climate policies, regulatory standards, sectoral guidelines. And this process of harmonization then reduces fragmentation, then creates what I think is a predictable investment environment. A practical example is one of the tools which WHO developed is called the NDC quality criteria for mainstreaming health in NDCs. So it helps to ensure clarity, ambition, and also implementability in a way which can then create a standard across different countries so that you can come up with some measurable metrics of understanding progress. So, for example, SADC, they are demonstrating this role by, harmonizing climate change adaptation and other sectoral initiatives. So they guide quite a lot from meteorology data, water governance, climate change adaptation. There's quite a lot which they are, developing in terms of regional standards and policies, which can then guide countries. And as you know, NDCs at this point in time, they're quite innovative. They are not just focusing on those traditional climate change mitigation sectors. They are covering quite a lot. And we also see COMESA coming on board with regional climate policy guidelines and, for example, climate information systems. So high quality and aligned NDCs, they seem to be more attractive for climate funds and private investors. We are seeing that through some project proposals we are developing, where we are continuously being referred to say, okay, what is the regional strategy? What are other countries doing? What lessons are you learning from other countries? Secondly, in terms of aggregation and bundling of investment pipelines, these regional economic communities really help countries to be able to pool their NDCs into regional priorities, which can then attract or create what we think would be regional investment portfolios. I will talk a bit about this later when I highlight to you some of the outcomes of the Africa Climate Summit 2, the regional announcements which were made there, which I believe regional economic communities can actually then tap into and support the different countries. We see that SADC, for example, they've got regional initiatives which are supporting countries to do a couple of things. We know of the Southern Africa Power Pool. We know also that COMESA is working on regional project pipelines, which are supporting things like climate smart agriculture and shared value chains, renewable energy, and all those sectors which contribute to climate action. And then you can find them as very strong sectors in the NDCs themselves. So again, the issue of working on regional joint project proposals aligned to the NDC targets, we see these, the likes of SADC and COMESA really supporting, infrastructure projects, transboundary ecosystems work, which can then, blend issues to do with carbon markets and other things, which can support countries to be able to then implement their NDCs. With these regional economic bodies, we can have regional pathways to the implementation of NDCs. And the first bit is that shared climate risks require shared responses. As you know, climate change doesn't have borders. We've been seeing a lot of droughts, cyclones, extreme weather events, which basically do not stop at borders. So cross-border work is a good example of the need for coordinated regional pathways. There is efficiency in partnering across the borders. There's more opportunities for learning. There's aggregation. There is also reduced risk. So this is very critical to note. And as you know, if we implement in regionally harmonized interventions, we could be able to lower the cost, for example, for technology deployment and other things. We're also seeing that donors themselves, they are now creating funding consortiums for very specific thematic areas. And this is a realization that joint efforts, they are cost effective. There's, cross-learning, and then there's scaled achievement of the objectives we are aiming in terms of climate action. At COP30, we saw that a group of donors came together and they announced $300 million, for example, for work on climate change and health, as an example, because this is what I'm quite conversant with. It shows the value of joint work. You will cut a lot of different costs associated with the small projects, small grants, and small procurement processes. So this is also one of the most critical benefits of working at that particular level. We've also seen the transformational kind of an opportunity when it comes to infrastructure, because at times you realize that infrastructure is regional by design. Even if you look at roads, power lines, etc. So we have seen things like the Southern Africa power pool, the transmission corridors, data systems with regional cooperation in place, which works in terms of multi-country infrastructure. So this is an opportunity for countries to come together and work with regional bodies to implement those cross-border initiatives, which can cut costs, but most importantly, they give a sense of coordination for the donors, for them to fund something which has a regional impact, right? So this is what I just wanted to say. I've got a few other points, but at this point, I feel like I can stop here and we can discuss if there's anything I then need to further elaborate. Thanks, and over to you, Tamu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mshosho. It was quite a captivating talk in which, a discussion on regional economic communities, serve not as administrative bodies, but as strategic platforms that strengthen, coordinate, and also accelerate climate action across countries by enabling, shared policies, pooled resources, cross-border projects, and collective negotiation of power. I also liked how you interrogated the regional dimension of climate finance, highlighting that, limited resources, fragmented policies, or a lack of scale may constrain national efforts. It is important also to consider how, or when the regional collaboration can reduce inefficiencies that attract blended finance, foster carbon markets, and harmonize regulations to create, more predictable and equitable pathways for funding NDCs. Thank you very much, Dr. Mshosho, for that. On that note, I would like to open this platform to everybody who would like to ask some questions, some comments to Dr. Jeremiah Mshosho. Any comments, any questions? Probably, Dr. Mshosho, I can abuse my position as the moderator to pose a question while just maybe everyone else is preparing. So my question is, how can climate and NDC financing architectures in Southern Africa be structured in a way that they are decentralized in decision making and give power to frontline communities and ensure meaningful inclusion of women, youth, people living with disabilities, and also how do we leverage regional economic communities, to harmonize the policies that facilitate cross-border investment? Thank you.
Very, very interesting question. There is quite a lot which is happening right now, and I will give you, for example, why WHO is not a regional economic body. We are working on regional frameworks which can support countries to do that. But I know that, for example, Africa CDC, they've got a 5-year work plan on climate change, which really is informed by the country needs. So that could be a starting point in terms of giving a sense of direction for the region itself. But if you were following the Africa Climate Summit #2, there were a number of initiatives which were announced via the Addis Ababa Leaders Declaration. And among other things, there were funding mechanisms which were announced there. And a lot of countries are already benefiting from those kind of initiatives. For example, the Africa Climate Finance Facility, the African Climate Innovation Compact, which is aiming to fundraise 50 billion annually, and things like that. So this is an opportunity where these regional economic bodies are pulling funds together in a single pot. And then this single pot, this is where countries can then benefit from. Right. So this is one. Number two, decentralization. This has been a huge debate. I was listening to Veronica in terms of the statistics of what is flowing into Africa, but also what is not flowing into Africa. But what then comes to Africa sometimes doesn't cascade to get to the communities where the actual implementation is happening. There are bottlenecks. Money gets somewhere, it gets stuck and spent, and then doesn't go down. We are following the example which I gave you, that there was 300 million which was announced. I am leading an initiative to bring together all the regional partners in Africa and to go for that $300 million. And what we want to do with that money is to create what I call a co-investment facility. So these, foundations, they're going to put that money into one pot if they agree to work with us. Once we have that money, we are going to create sub-regional consortiums, right? And at that level, we will be looking at national level NGOs, but we want to further sub-grant that funding to community-based organizations. Because community-based organizations, they are grounded in the communities where the work is happening. So if you give only a national level organization to do this work, they do not have the full understanding of the scale, the type of problems, and how to properly target those communities. So we need to make sure that we push climate finance to go to the lowest level to do what? They have to design the interventions. They have to decide on where the money goes to and to do what, because they're the ones who understand the problem as they are living with it every single day. So we need to come up with frameworks which will ensure that the money goes to the lowest level and then the decisions are made from there, not somewhere in a regional office or a national office with so many computers and cars and big buildings. We need the money to go down there, and then the decisions are made, even if it's under the tree. So they choose their own solutions. And a good way of doing that is to start with, sort of ethnography kind of work, to go into the communities and understand the problems. Once you identify whatever activities need to be done, cost them based at the community level, understanding of what actually needs to be done, not to ship a solution from the capital city and bring it to them. So we need to sit with them, discuss and understand the problem, come up with the solution, and finance what the actual activities which they want to see happening within their communities. So I think there's quite a lot which needs to be done, but it all starts by coordination and being able to understand how we engage those who are on the front lines. Thanks, and over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mshosho. You can, I think there's another question in the chat box. You can just wait a bit. And I like the fact that you mentioned that you need ethnographers. I happen to be one of them. Anyway, the question that has been asked by Nonsikele Lonyoni is that how does the concept of sovereign bonds work with regards to what you've already mentioned, what you have said? in that regard, how does the concept of sovereign bonds work?
No, I wouldn't have much to say about that because I do not have much experience in that particular area. But in my previous life, we were engaging some donors who were interested in those. But at this point in time, I wouldn't be able to offer any meaningful recommendation on that. Thanks. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mshosho. I think if there are more questions, I think people would be asking as we go. At this point, also in being time conscious, I would like to call upon Dr. Albert Maipisi to talk us through what he has gathered for this dialogue. Dr. Maipisi holds a PhD in disaster management from the University of Free State in South Africa. He also taught courses in public administration, National University of Public Sovereign in Hungary, namely public finance, public policy analysis, sustainable public administration, and efficient state. He is also an MSc in disaster management from the National University of Science and Technology in Zimbabwe, and master's MA in defense and security studies from the Zimbabwe National Defense University, and also an honors degree in administration from the University of Zimbabwe. He is a lecturer and a UNISA postdoctoral fellow in the Institute of Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability. Before joining academia, he worked under the Parliament of Zimbabwe. Dr. Maipisi, please feel free to talk us through what you prepared for this dialogue.
Hi, colleagues, and thank you, Tamuka.
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. And my discussion is mostly going to be on how can climate finance flows be localized and decentralized to empower frontline communities. And in that respect, and from the discussions that we have, we are having, and to a large extent, considering what Dr. Mshosho has just presented, it shows that our funds are situated somewhere, and they are pulled from somewhere, and they are now supposed to be flowing to somewhere. And we expect them to flow here in Africa and then in our communities, which also brings about the fact that definitely there are a lot of other bottlenecks along the way. In fact, as the money reaches certain levels, as it tries to get to the lowest level or the last mile, basically it will be subtracted along the way. And it's Africa. The fact that this finance is coming from somewhere and it's coming down to us should not also make us relax and wait for that money to come. Because we should also understand that those who are actually handling these finances have got their own agendas and they've got their own desires that they seek to achieve. Hence, as Africa, we should also be very strategic as these funds are flowing, so that one, they also do not derail our own programs and plans. And at the same time, they do not deviate our national strategic objectives. So that having been said, it's critical now as I look around Africa, most African countries. If I look, for example, the carbon credits, I've seen a number of NGOs and private individuals who have actually bought and who are buying out, for example, people who are owning vast tracts of land, and to them, they want to do carbon credits business. And as they are doing this carbon business, carbon credits business, these people are basically the elites. So they would ensure that they conserve the environment there, they preserve the animals, the natural resources that are there, and then they get funds. So this fund, it means, would not reach to the people who are in the last mile of our climate discussion and debates. Those who actually face the problems as a result of climate, who suffer the most, would never actually get the benefits, which is a problem, and which is why we have the question how we can have these finances flow to the last mile, or how can they be decentralized. And having noted that climate change has become a business, yes, we have got different levels. The national level can get some of these finances, and unfortunately, at our national level, sometimes our countries are also in trouble as they seek this foreign currency. And to a large extent, they can also have it. And unfortunately, it would just go to the communities as greenwashing, and not necessarily with the quantities and expectations that could be expected when we actually get these finances. When we write proposals, when we write papers justifying them, sometimes they do not get to the people as anticipated. The same applies to the NGOs. The same applies to some of the CBOs. Because some of these CBOs are just livelihood vehicles for individuals. And as a result, we have had these programs, but their sustainability also have always become questionable. So we need, one, to decolonize climate finance. And we need also, as Africa, to take responsibility as Africa and as countries, so that we actually have control of these finances instead of us just waiting for the rains. If they don't come, then we do not have anything. If the rains fall somewhere, it means we do not have it in other parts of our countries. As much as it could be reported that the climate finance has been released. And what I think is critical for these finances to reach to the last mile, one is the need for innovation. We have got a lot of natural resources that we have in our different contexts. And we have got a lot of innovations that are already going on, which will never actually be seen growing. We have a lot of innovations, but because they lack the finances, they will never see the light of the day. But if we look at some of these natural resources, some of these trees that we have, some of the fruits that fall from those trees that we have, and we kind of create a business model with them, I think it can actually make our climate finance flows, when they come down to fund such, they can actually become more sustainable in the long term, whilst actually assisting the people on the ground. What am I saying? Let's say we grow some mango trees across a province, and we teach these people how to maximize in terms of the fruits and use them for commercial purposes. In terms of the fruits, we produce some juice. These fruits are everywhere. They are lying around most of our countries. They are not being used. If we can actually fund some of these localized business projects, not necessarily to give them just as victims who need response fund, I think that can actually help us. And that can also reduce the extractivism that we have, where some people just come and take these natural resources for their benefit, and then without really plowing back to our local communities. I think another aspect is about transparency. These funds are actually flowing down to the communities sometimes, but they are not really reaching to the needy as expected. The bottlenecks that has been said. We should at least, I think, make it more transparent so that when these funds move, they can easily also be known that some funds have moved and what are the kind of results that they have brought. Unfortunately, some of these results of the benefits of these funds or how these funds have been used are sent to global offices far away from the locals. And sometimes the locals would not be able to actually comment on whether these funds has really been used in their context and as reported, which actually gives another problem for us as Africa in terms of making these funds actually reach to the desired destinations, which are the last mile and the people who are actually suffering from the effects of climate change. And for example, we have got some indigenous trees in across Africa, and these trees naturally grow. And in some instances, no one actually is using any of their fruits or any of their residues or any part of them. For example, some of their fruits can actually be used for feeding animals, for example, and it could be a good business. But unfortunately, because we have not really looked at the local level and look at what they have, which can also help in terms of climate change adaptation and response, and which can help these communities sustainably deal with climate change. I think we have always looked at the upper and sometimes focused more on the policy frameworks, which to a large extent have not been used or implemented effectively in Africa. I know, Tamuka, I don't know in terms of my time. Do I still have time?
Yeah, I can give you 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay. Okay, so basically, I'm just saying, let us decolonize the climate finance concept and let us own it. And let us also seek local solutions, including from the locals. I think we can also harness a lot of potential that our young people have in technical colleges and in vocational colleges, in universities, to try and have them try some of their projects. And then probably we can grow from that level, instead of us always expecting the sky to pour the rains to us, and we are always receiving, and we are not actually giving out anything else. Thank you very much, Tamuka and colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maipisi, for that insightful presentation. I think you've highlighted quite, critical issues here, notably how critical it is not only to allocate funds, but also to design, financing models that truly empower vulnerable groups, ensuring that, their voices are heard and also their agencies recognized in climate action. What stood out, I think, was also the need to move beyond the tokenistic, inclusion towards, structures that embed participation, accountability, and also local knowledge at the very heart of climate and NDC finance. I think I would like us to all to reflect on this as we move on with our discussion. How can all these, principles be operationalized in practice, especially across diverse communities in Southern Africa? And also, I would like to invite our panel and the audience to consider these challenges as we explore, the next dimension of climate finance governance accountability, and the role of regional enablers. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Maipisi. I think at this juncture, I would like to open, to the floor. Anybody with a question, comment, Dr. Maipisi, anybody would like to ask a question or to make a comment? I think in the chat box, I think there's also a comment which was sent by Nonsikelelo. The concept of loss and damage, how can it be leveraged more in Africa? Would you want to comment on that, Dr. Maipis?
Yes. Loss and damage as a result of climate change impacts, like disasters. It's another thing, because generally we saw at local level, we have losses at local level, but the challenge is sometimes the scale of damage and loss that can come, which sometimes may not be easily, whose gap may not be easy to close. And as a result, we may need to have both private sector, the governments, and the NGOs to work together towards that. Because even at national level alone, it may be very difficult, because we may have, for example, recently we have the cyclone Idai disaster, which we can also attribute to climate change. But the challenge is, if you look at the numbers and the level of destruction, if we want to come up with the cost and try to ensure that we actually give compensation, you discover that it can chew a huge chunk of the government budget. So maybe at global level, we also need to start to look and think about that. That is very important. Yes, I agree with that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maipisi.
But also maybe there is the other aspect in terms of there is the debate around probably reparations. Africa, I think the African Union in some levels, we may need to maybe to convince the Eastwell colonizers to have a pool of resources. Instead of us saying you are paying back, we can probably say, let them create a fund that can at least help in times of need. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Any other question? So there's a question from Francis in the chat box. Let me read it for you. So Francis is saying, when you say let us decolonize the climate finance content and own it, what does that look like in practice for you? For example, should local actors be defining what counts as a bankable project, or co-writing the criteria and metrics used by funds? I would be keen to hear what concrete shifts you would prioritize to truly localize ownership of climate finance. So that's a question from Francis.
Thank you, Francis. Quite interesting. I think what I'm saying is also that he who pays the piper naturally calls for the tune. And as a result, as long as we expect this fund to be coming from elsewhere all the time, it means what we really desire will never be fully met. These funds can come. For example, Dr. Mshosho was talking about a 5-year plan. But is climate change going to be there for 5 years, the next 5 years? No. So we should also own the responsibility to actually deal with the climate change problems that we are facing as Africa. Not necessarily to fully expect, to a large extent, expect these funds from somewhere. Of course, it's a good opportunity for us to get these funds. But at the same time, we should also build some funds at local level. So yes, it's not just the decisions alone, but also the action we should not always push the climate change issue to the future, always saying we are planning for the future, we are planning for the future. I'm saying let's start now from where we are as Africa, and let us accept who we are and what we have, but also start to move from there. That is partly what I meant by decolonizing the climate agenda in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. I think at this point, in the interest of time, I would like to move on to, I think, our last speaker, before we also open to other questions that include everybody who's in the panel. So our next speaker is Dr. Edmund Mukaratigwa. He is a distinguished former member of parliament and chairperson of the Mines Committee in Zimbabwe, with extensive experience serving on key parliamentary committees. He is an active member of the International Climate Parliament and a pioneering founder of several organic companies. As an accomplished energy and sustainability practitioner, Dr. Mukaratigwa holds a PhD in energy innovation, an MBA in energy and sustainability, and also an MSc in international affairs and a national defense certificate. He is also a qualified electrical engineering who has authored 2 influential books on hydrogen energy. Dr. Mukaratigwa, the platform is yours. Please kindly talk us through what you prepared for this dialogue.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Good afternoon, all. It's an interesting discussion on the table. And speaking last, I think a lot of things have been touched on by the previous speakers, even relating to my topic. But allow me to perhaps give nuggets as I try to articulate questions around my topic, and perhaps what we pick from various communities, various countries, various regions in terms of the issue of climate change, the issue of climate financing, the issue of fossil fuel, net zero emissions. Some have got a target of 2050, some like China 2060, but these are just the blueprints. There are efforts that are backing that focus. There are challenges along the way, which we are all witnessing. But I must hasten to say, while my area is about private sector, while my area is about partnerships, we all know the stakeholders involved in terms of partnerships. But let's focus on the private sector and say, who is the private sector? To me, I'm reminded of business. And when we talk business, what are we talking about? We're talking about capitalism. We're talking about delving into a setting, into a business model, into an operation that will bring rewards. We are talking of something that touches livelihoods, that hinges on human development. And every human being has got some aspirations. We all, right now, because of social media, because of different cultures that we live in, that we experience, we now know, most people around the world know about climate change and the potential effects. But as much as many people know, but the question is how many believe that this might lead to a catastrophe, given the different continents, the different regions that we come from. Do we have a meeting of the minds in terms of the potential catastrophic effect that can culminate from climate change? impact. I don't think there's a consensus there. Yes, in terms of funding, in terms of the need to survive, I think we have a consensus. But in terms of the potential effects, for example, coming from the global south, there are questions that you talk of the global north. These countries have developed, but in trying to develop, what did they use? They use energy sources, they use resources, they use the processes that actually polluted the environment. They used processes that are actually contributing and exacerbating climate change and global warming. So when you say, let's look at intervention, let us be proactive, are we all going to have one mindset? I don't think so. Because the global south, they are now saying it's our opportunity to now develop. And ironically, the global south, for example, here in Africa, and if I can narrow down to the SADC region, Southern Africa, you find countries that are endowed with the abundance of critical minerals, battery minerals, that are necessary to catalyze development. Where Europe, for example, took 100 years to modernize, we can actually take less. But there's an underwriting that is needed. Capital resource, do we have? Not only that, the mindset. Do we have the correct mindset? So when you look at the private sector, you can then divide it or segment it into large scale. Your multinational companies, they also act in our local regions or in our local countries. Even at local country level or region level, we also have got large scale private players, those that turn over multi-millions, if not billions, if not trillions. We also have medium size private players. We also have got small scale private players. We have sole operators, or call them individuals. They are also trying to prove a business case. But when we now talking partnership, there's a straight jacket. There's a one-size-fits-all approach. There's a way that these private players are defined. Some will not meet the criteria and they will not find themselves within that bracket. They will be excluded. So before we even talk about this, I'm sure there's depth of information. There's need for research to be able to see which categories and who fits where. And when we now want to come up with a solution, how do we do it? I've attended forums where those from the global south are always clamoring, nothing for us without us. If I tell you the private sector will be saying nothing for us without us, but those in the global north will be saying also nothing for us without us, because they have the capital, and you now want to dictate how that capital is going to be used in a foreign jurisdiction without them. They have to lay conditions. So is there a meeting of the minds? These are the issues that we need to interrogate. And in any case, that brings us to Africa, that brings us to Southern Africa. And Africa's pathway to climate resilience and sustainable development calls for a dynamic integration, I would say, of multilateral development banks. Because I'm talking about a business case here, financing, private sector engagement, enterprise development. And this enterprise development will account even for the smallest player if we have a meeting of the minds. And economic principles and values that maximize regional advantage. I think COP30 has been talked about by most previous speakers. Let me just refresh your memory on COP29. MDBs pledged 120 billion annually by 2030, with over 60% for low and middle income countries, prioritizing just transitions, equity, and local impact. For SADC, this is transformative and welcome. It's an opportunity to unlock new financial flows, green jobs, and resilient industries, and leveraging strategic collaboration and tested financial philosophies. But are we involved in the writing of the template that is one size fits all approach as SADC? You'll find most of the times were excluded. This is a prerogative of the global north. Yes, our leaders from the SADC, from Africa, attend those international forums, but do they really have a final say? Your guess is as good of mine as mine. So we come to the question that guides what I'm talking about in terms of my topic. How can, I've put it in another way, by the way, how can innovative partnership models be designed to transform Southern Africa's private sector perception of NDC and climate financing from a compliance obligation or optional activity into a core business opportunity that drives growth and competitiveness and long-term value? How can we enforce that? You realize that medium to large scale companies operating in any jurisdiction, in our jurisdiction in Zimbabwe, in SADC, in South Africa, Botswana, you name it, they are all aligned to the aspect of plowing back. They practice what the globe practice in terms of corporate social responsibilities. Of course, some of them are not as transparent, but they are as transparent as their governments. So policy framework becomes an issue. Local control measures becomes an issue. Transparency and accountability becomes an issue. And this is like what was alluded to, those who pay the piper. That's what they prescribe, but excluding our own perspective. So in terms of perception management, we have got a mammoth task ahead of us. And I believe these dialogues that we are having can actually massage towards perhaps an innovative approach. My belief is that the solution is multidimensional. The solution is going to come from all of us if we start treating each other with respect, if we start accommodating each other, if we start tolerating each other's ideas. But at local level, as Africa, we also need to deal with the conflict. There are lots of conflict in Africa. We also need to deal with corruption. There's a lot of corruption. Not only Africa, even the whole world, the whole global south. We need to deal with that. This is where transparency and accountability, monitoring and evaluation comes into play to help. We cannot talk about partnerships without talking about these aspects. So innovative partnership models that could shift Southern Africa's private sector view of NDC and climate financing from a compliance obligation to a compelling business opportunity include the creation of a blended finance facility that combine public MDBs and private resources to de-risk, by the way, investments and enhance returns. Structured public-private partnerships with clear long-term offtake agreements and incentives for green innovations and the establishment of regional climate innovation hubs that connect corporates, SMEs, financiers, and research institutions for joint project development and scaling. Embedding climate finance into value chains, such as supporting suppliers to decarbonize, for instance, or adopt renewable energy, can unlock cost savings and market differentiation, while participation in robust carbon markets creates new revenue streams and reputational benefits. This is why every company values plowing back to communities. It's about their reputation, their benefits, their social license. Policy frameworks that reward climate leadership, e.g., tax incentives, fast track permitting, preferential procurement, further sweeten the business case. Ultimately, partnerships that are transparent, inclusive, and anchored in shared risk and reward will encourage the private sector to see climate and NDC financing as integral to profit, resilience, and sustainable growth rather than a mere compliance case. Why a mere compliance case? This group,
1 minute.
this section,
Dr. Mkarati,
the
1 minute.
private sector is usually excluded because the policies, the architecture, the global architecture talks about per capita. When we talk per capita, we are worried about the individual in the communities where the CBOs are, the civil society, the donor community. They focus on that using per capita definitions. But the influence of the private player who is in between, we are not really harnessing it to actually buttress our focus. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. I could have gone. By the way, I said I want to give you nuggets, but let me rest my case for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mkarati Gwa, for highlighting, for giving us nuggets that highlight the innovative pathways. What is particularly striking also, I think, is the challenge of shifting perception, how climate and NDC finance, moves from being seen as optional to being attractive, strategic and profitable opportunity. I think also I would like to invite everyone to reflect, and to think about what concrete mechanisms, whether through policy incentives, blended finance or collaborative models, can actually make this shift a reality in Southern Africa, and how these approaches can ensure that both communities and investors benefit in long term. On that note, I would like to open this platform for questions, comments, to either Dr. Mkarati Gwa or to any of the panelists. This is the time to ask questions. Anybody with questions to the panelists or to our last speaker? Any questions? Probably I would like again to abuse my position as a moderator to ask Dr. Mkarati Gwa a question. Dr. Mkarati Gwa, my question is, how can private sector actors in Southern Africa be incentivized to treat climate and NDC finance as a strategic investment? And what innovative partnership models, be it blended finance, public-private community initiatives, or impact bonds, can align profitably with equitable climate outcomes?
Thank you very much. there are various ways to incentivize them. The first one is to actually involve them. And in terms of nationally determined contributions, we see national governments taking the center stage. If we can have, for instance, in SADC, national governments and non-state actors who are the private players joining hands in terms of couching policy frameworks and in terms of attending these international forums together and in terms of coming up with the blueprints that are going to guide the implementation and how to tap from climate finance. And if climate derived finance can take the form of trying to co-create and accelerate enterprise development, that would actually help, because as SADC, we are going to be inspired by climate finance, creating an ecosystem that is enriched by startup and SME innovations, supported by incubators and accelerators in renewables. For instance, solar mini grids. We've seen that in Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, and climate smart agriculture that has happened in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and other regional countries. When you talk of SADC or in Africa, there are probably only two countries, Mauritius and Seychelles, that have got 100% in terms of energy access. So Africa or Global South were at the center, were grappling with poverty. So we need to find an intersection. And the intersection in terms of trying to harness or to address poverty, to alleviate poverty, is energy access. And in terms of energy access, governments are not responsible for the actual project implementation. It's private sector led initiative, but the private sector must also ensure efficiency, transparency, and accountability, but guided by policies that are consistent. If you have consistent policies, you are incentivizing the private sector. If you have the tax cuts, you are incentivizing the private sector. So it's the co-creation, it's collaboration, it's the definition, it's the accepting each other and having well-defined value chains and creating and enabling environment and ensuring that there is access to that finance, but very few private players who attest to having perhaps had access to that finance. But the focus right now, even from COP30 and the multinational corporations that are the friends of the climate global combating initiative, they are all agreeing that the sustainable development goals by 2030 can only be enabled to be successful if we combat poverty. How do we achieve that? By enhancing energy access. But how do we do that when we have 780 million people in the globe, mainly the global south, without access to basic energy? This is where now, when you talk the private players in terms of perception management that I talked about, you want to condition them to say, while our countries, SADC is endowed with coal, for example, they can make a business case out of energy access. How? Mini grids, off grids, solar powered homes are a business opportunity, and they must be allowed to take part. When they are doing that, they are actually contributing to the aspirations and objectives of climate financing and those behind mobilizing funds for climate financing. So maybe there can be a meeting of the minds, and they are now sharing the cake, they are getting profits, but they are no longer focusing on fossil fuel, which exacerbate carbon footprints. I'll probably end by giving you an example. In Zimbabwe, we have got a lot of coal and gas and thermal power plants, and we have got hydroelectric. Hydroelectric power is accounting for more than 80% of power in our country. And I think this is the same for the rest of the Southern African region. Yes, we are all focused on solar and other renewable energy efforts.
Doc,
But perhaps we should know that our countries have been what they are, and they are continuing to have energy access because of hydroelectric power. Let's give prominence to that and have more local players taking part in that.
Doc,
I
I
was
think
going to
we've eaten into that. I think we are ending at 4 p.m. Southern African time. So that's why I'm sorry for cutting you off. But I would like to thank all of the speakers and the participants for joining us. Thank you those who participated through sending their questions on the chat box, but we do not have much time. I think as we draw this dialogue to a close, it is clear that bridging climate finance gaps requires collaboration across communities, governments, and the private sector, and also the regional platforms. So the insights shared today highlight the importance of inclusion, innovation, and accountable governance. And thank you again, our wonderful speakers. I'm really sure that we are going to be inviting you again to continue having these conversations in detail. At this point, I think I would like to call upon my colleagues, Washington and Dr. Akinyi, to give concluding remarks. Over to you, Washington and Dr. Akinyi.
Thank you very much, Tamuka. And to our very insightful panelists. Unfortunately, I'm not able to turn on my camera due to the environment, the background that I am in. But we've been able to, and Tamuka has very much highlighted most of the things that we have had today. And importantly, what is cutting across even from our East African dialogues that we had yesterday is that there's a lot of need to have the frontline communities be the people that receive the climate finance, because they're the people that actually are the most impacted by climate change. So there's need for climate finance to trickle down to the most vulnerable in our countries. And that means that there's no need, that this should be, everyone should be part of the conversations, including the indigenous communities, including the youth, the women, most generally the marginalized people in the climate finance discourse. There's need for them to be part of the decision making. They need to be on the table. They need to be at the table. So with all these comments and insights that we've received today, I want to once again thank you very much, all our attendees and panelists, for being part of these conversations. This is just the first convening of 3. And we're hoping that in the coming weeks, even in the new year, you'll be able to join us, as this is supposed to be culminating into a state of evidence report on climate finance in Africa that is supposed to be launched at the annual Climate Finance Conference in Kampala next year. So through these insights that we are receiving, through your active participation, these are the things that will inform the climate finance, that climate finance report that we're hoping to launch. And most importantly, I want to thank Dr. Tamuka who's been very much at the front of organizing this, and without forgetting the efforts that Washington and Nancy have been putting, and Maria as well, have been putting into this, ensuring that these conversations are a success. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. May God bless you, may God protect you, and may God be with you throughout this weekend and into the end of the year. And I wish you the very best and the best weekend. Thank you very much, and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much.